Hello, Pulp Hounds. How are we doing? So this video is one I wanted to make since I've been doing my YouTube channel. Right from the very start. And it's something I've kept putting off and asking friends if they thought I should do it or not. And I've decided to. I'm actually filming this. It's Saturday today. New Year's Day. Happy New Year, everybody. And then if I decide not to upload this video, once I've finished it and watched it, then I've got time to do another video in time for Wednesday's book video, which will be today. So, yeah. So if you don't hear me saying that, you know I didn't upload it. And if you did hear me saying that, then, ooh, I've uploaded it. So, let's talk about the elephant in the room. And if you don't want to hear me talk about the elephant in the room, I will put the time that you need to skip to here to get to my favourite things in my Lovecraft collection. Right. Lovecraft's racism. I'd love to do more videos about H.P. Lovecraft on my channel. I am a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan, and I have been pretty much my entire life. And I've avoided talking about him a lot because of the problems that some of his fiction contains. When it was first brought to my attention that Lovecraft's fiction contained horrible racism, I was immediately defensive of Lovecraft. Largely because the stories that were most problematic, such as ones like Horror at Red Hook, weren't necessarily my favourites. The favourite stories of mine that Lovecraft wrote don't necessarily have like specific racism in. There are aspects of insensitivity towards race in a lot of his fiction. And I think that's when people bring in the argument that it was a product of its time, it was a different era. And it was a different era. And as I've said before on my channel, in other videos, if you engage with entertainment from a different era, a lot of attitudes are going to be different. Attitudes towards race, gender, sexuality, politics, everything like that. As time's gone on, we've started moving towards, I think, a more understanding society. I don't think we're quite there yet, but you know, things are better than they were in the 20s and 30s. In a recent video, I said while I was listening to the audiobooks of some Sax Rohmer Fu Manchu novels. Now, I fully understood that there would be passages that were racially insensitive, given the nature of the main antagonist, Fu Manchu. There's no way around it. But I went into it knowing that that was something that was probably going to be apparent. I underestimated Sax Rohmer's seeming contempt for the majority of Asian culture, and like people from China, Japan, even Korea were presented in a derogatory and really unpleasant way. And it did kind of spoil my enjoyment of the novels, and it's my prerogative as a reader to duck out of reading those, I gave up on them. I got through about 2.5, and it wasn't that with Lovecraft there are certain stories that are overtly difficult and unpleasant, whereas with Sax Roma it was constantly peppered throughout his novels. And so that was my decision. And if you have decided that you don't want to engage with any of Lovecraft's stories, that's your decision as a reader, and nobody can say that's the wrong decision. I love older entertainment, and as you look at older entertainment, there is always things that shock and surprise you. Even through shows like The Sweeney and The Professionals. I love those TV shows. But in The Professionals, there's like horrifically racist slurs that are used as a casual insult. Even up to... I don't really watch it and haven't watched it much, but I know some of my chums that like the TV show Friends have said, looking back, some of it is insensitive towards certain groups in society, and so that's quite modern. So if you go further back, you're going to encounter this kind of difficult use of racial slurs. And I really, really hope that starting to include a few more videos about H.P. Lovecraft on my channel doesn't in any way indicate that I am okay or accepting of any kind of racism or any kind of ism. I'm one of those annoying people that will pick friends up and say, that's maybe not all right. Why did you say that? Why use that language? And I just don't want my fondness for something to be seen as a negative thing. If you now have a dislike of Lovecraft because of this, then you're probably not going to have clicked on this video. And as I always say about anything that's a flashpoint conversationally for people, I don't really want to argue with anyone. If you hate Lovecraft and have cut him out of your horror reading canon, then that's fine. That's cool. You do that because that's up to you. Just as I stopped reading the Sax Roma Fu Manchu novels, which are still quite popular, and there's still Titan editions that are currently available. I'm not going to dwell too much on the more racist stories, because I think there was so much amazing fiction that Lovecraft wrote that we don't need to dwell on those, or I feel like I don't need to dwell on those. There's a lot of stuff online that if you want to delve into it further and have a read, as I've done, there's essays and articles that quote his letters and other documents and stuff where he's saying how much he liked Hitler. A lot of fans seem to say that towards the end of his life, he started to rethink his ideas on race and racial purity. Which is, yeah, that's true. And a lot of fans say if he'd have kept going the same way, he would have been all right. In which case, that would have made him more acceptable. But he didn't, did he? He didn't quite get there. So let's have a look at some of my favourite books in my Lovecraft collection. These still make me happy. There are certain stories I do skip, and there are certain stories I constantly read. And if you're now thinking, actually, maybe Lovecraft isn't for me, I don't want to see this or continue with this, then thank you for watching this far, and I will hopefully see you in the next video. The earliest Lovecraft I've got is a very battered copy of The Weird Shadow over Innsmouth, published by Bart or Bartholomew House in 1944, I think. I absolutely adore this. It just makes me happy just to have something that's that old. It's knackered, and the condition. We hope you will enjoy reading this book. Kindly leave for others to do the same. Lakeshore Hotel. Oops, I didn't rob it from the Lakeshore Hotel. I bought it online, but somebody probably robbed it from the Lakeshore Hotel then. And I could have paid a bit more and got one in a bit better condition, which I kind of wish I had done now, but I have it, and it's gorgeous. And I do really love Shadow over Innsmouth. That's one of my favourites that I keep returning to time and time again. So, yeah, 1944. Then we're moving on a little bit to 1950. It's the first British edition of The Haunter of the Dark. It's the Galance edition. Now, I honestly think The Haunter of the Dark is my favourite. Oh, it's 1951. I do apologise. The Haunter of the Dark is one of my favourite collections. I think just about everyone is an absolute Lovecraftian corker. And I must admit, I think one of my all-time favourite Lovecraft stories is The Call of Cthulhu. And I love sitting and reading Call of Cthulhu in a book that was published in 1951. There's something so magical about it that just makes me so happy. An old, but it's like reading the Shadow over Innsmouth in a book, like an old pulp from 1944. It's a joyous experience. So this is one of my absolute favourite Lovecraft things I own. It's not in the best condition, and I still don't know if it should have come with a dust jacket. I'm sure one of you guys can answer. I've never seen it with the dust jacket. I've always seen it like this. One that does have the dust jacket is my Galance copy of Dagon. I always think that Dagon isn't necessarily the most inspired anthology. There's some really good stories in it. I like From Beyond, and I love the challenge From Beyond. I genuinely adore Herbert West Reanimator. Just because I know it was Lovecraft trying to write something a bit more commercial, a bit less poetic and kind of flouncy in its language. I wish he'd done more like that, because it's harsh, it's full on. And then there's the early tales and fragments and stuff that always get anthologized. And I don't think they're the best he wrote. He refined his craft. And then finishing off with supernatural horror in literature is interesting. And as I said in a video the other day, I love my copy and do refer to it a fair bit to find like lost and forgotten authors. But it's a bit of a cop-out sticking it in a big anthology of Lovecraft's fiction. But that's from the mid-60s. Another one in that Galance range is The Shadow Out of Time. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Derleth, not because I'm a kind of fanboy purist. I'm just not a huge fan of his style. The Lovecraft stories are really nice. There's a really good selection. But when we go on to Derleth's revisions of Lovecraft, it's not really... They're not necessarily my cup of tea, and I don't read a lot of Derleth's individual stories and novels. They're not something I ever go back to. I'm just not a fan of his work. I am, however, a huge fan of what Derleth did to promote Lovecraft and weird fiction generally. I think what he did with Arkham House is staggering. But fiction-wise, he's not my favourite. Right, let's move on to paperbacks. We've got one from, I think, from the early 60s. So this is published by Avon. I think this is lovely, this. Really nice. I love that green font. I don't know why they put original title Lurking Fear. Maybe it's so people didn't buy it twice. If you already own the Lurking Fear, you don't need to buy this one. But it's a really lovely anthology. And it's that smaller kind of size. I do like the smaller size, which is a bit of a throwback to kind of pulpy kind of size, because normal paperback size is more like that, which leads us neatly on to Ballantine. Ballantine or Ballantine? I'm never sure. Let's call it Ballantine. Let's just call it Ballan. Let's just call it Alan. Alan books. This, again, is more revisions by Derleth, which they do keep cropping up. And it's this describes them as the last rare stories of a master craftsman in horror. And he was a master craftsman in horror. But these aren't necessarily Lovecraft stories. There's a lot of conjecture over the notes that Derleth used to recreate lost Lovecraft stories. And I'm glad he did. Even though they're not my favourite, I'm really glad that he put this much effort into keeping the name and the work of H.P. Lovecraft alive. So, some more Ballantine. This was always a favourite when I was younger. The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. I do like the whole Dreamlands things. I'll show you the contents page and then you can get an idea of what's in it. I did like the Strange High House in the Mist. I think that was one of my favourites, but these were really nice, and you'll see why some of these are some of my favourites in a moment. Okay, a little bit later on, Ballantine kind of redesigned the format. Now, this one is one of my absolute favourite Lovecraft books, even though I don't read it very often. And it's The Fungi from Yuggoth and Other Poems. I don't like poems. I own 3 books of poems. This is one of them. I'd rather have a story than a poem. But I never see... I bought this in the days before the internet, the days before you could just source whatever book you want. And I found it in a second-hand comic shop in Leeds. And I was so excited because I just didn't know it existed. And I think even back in the 80s, it was about £8, and it's like, oh, that's a lot of money. But I just had to have it. So in that same style and format, I've also got The Doom That Came to Sarnath, which is another lovely collection. It's quite a nice... there's a few of his revisions in there, like the Crawling Chaos and Imprisoned with the Pharaohs. It's just quite a nice nice potpourri of interesting bits and bobs. Fantasy and horror and revisions. And then... this one's not actually by Lovecraft, but I'm including it because it was published with a lot of the Lovecrafty ones. And that's Lynn Carter's biography, Lovecraft: A Look Behind the Cthulhu Mythos, which is a really interesting biography of Lovecraft and a biography of the whole mythos, how the whole thing came about. Because the Cthulhu mythos ended up being bigger than Lovecraft was, I think, and currently It's I know it's not as big as like Star Wars and things like that, but it's I don't know what the word is. It's a thing. It's a property. It's a licensable, marketable trade, brand name that people enjoy and people buy into without necessarily worrying too much who the author is. They will enjoy Call of Cthulhu type things. I know I do. And then we've got the other pile. We've got the Panther pile. Now, the Ballantine books were quite hard to get. Again, in the days before the internet, when you used to just scour second-hand bookshops and markets and flea markets and junk shops and charity shops for like interesting, weird fiction, it was Panther. And most of these are what I bought when I was 14, 15. So the oldest Panther I've got is Lovecraft's novel, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, which is a good pulp horror novel. It's not, I don't think it's his best work. And I don't think this cover's particularly indicative of the novel. But hey, it's a really lovely old Panther edition that was 2 and 6. And then Panther, in the more into the 70s, they went with this like weird Teutonic type font, which I quite like the whole gothicness of it. It gives it a gothic feel. So this is The Lurker at the Threshold, the novel that August Derleth finished. And I think it's probably my favourite out of all the Derleth kind of revisions and continuations. It does work quite well. I like that one. An oddly composed cover for The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, which is fun and lovely. You'll have seen a lot of these in my Panther video, unfortunately, but just as I was digging through Lovecrafty books, I thought, I'm just going to show them all. There's no point trying to like pick a couple of favourites. The Lurking Fear, this is a lovely cover. I really like that wraparound cover. And The Haunter of the Dark. This is my really, really old copy of Haunter of the Dark that I've owned for decades. And this is what I used to sit in my bedsit and read when I'd read The Call of Cthulhu. Oh, it's just so lovely. It's just such a lovely thing, I think. I adore the font, the typeface, the cover. I just love that. It feels very English. This was one of the first Lovecraft books I got. And I remember thinking that looks like kind of an English church door. So at first, I didn't figure that everything was set in America. I thought some of them were set in... I know Rats in the Walls is set in England, isn't it? But I thought Lovecraft was more of an English writer just because this book made me feel like it was all very, very English. So we're back to the revisions by Derleth. The Shuttered Room. I think this is a gorgeous cover. I absolutely love that hand forest wood design tree thing. I just want to give it a big horror high five. It's awesome. And then I think my least favourite Panther book. It just don't work for me. The bubbly, cartoony font. And as much as I adore books with the skull on the cover, you know I do. It's got an actual glass eye as well. You can tell by the shape. They just bobbed a little glass eye in there. That's genius. I don't think it's right for Lovecraft. If this was another horror author, then I would just adore this. But it don't feel Lovecraftian to me. And then Panther went with a change of design after The Tomb, thankfully, and kind of came up with this nice, stylish, just plain font and plain, so it said Lovecraft in a really plain lettering style. A nice, the title a bit smaller, Lovecraft being prominent, and then a gorgeous illustration. Something that makes sense in relation to the horror that Lovecraft tried to conjure up in the reader's minds. So that's a lovely lurker at the threshold. Ah, my favourite, Haunter of the Dark. I really like that one. That's so nice. It's kind of ugly in a lovely way. I do love this cover of Dagon. I'm not the biggest fan of Dagon as a collection, but I think this is a weird and unusual cover. I do like that one. I think that's very cool. The Tomb, again with a better cover and a better typeface. Generally a nicer looking book. Overall, a little bit worn, that one, but hey, it probably cost me about 30p. And then, At the Mountains of Madness. At the Mountains of Madness is one of my all-time favourite Lovecraft stories. It's more of a novella, isn't it? It was just, I remember reading that, just feeling the loneliness of the setting and the otherworldliness of what they were discovering. And the fact that, you know, certain polar regions haven't been explored properly. We don't know what's there. So it's possible that there could be these hideous elder things there. Gorgeous, gorgeous cover. And so it's more like Lovecraft's novels. So we got Mountains of Madness, Dreams in the Witch House, Randolph Carter, Unknown Kadath, Silver Key, and Through the Gates of the Silver Key. So when I used to read At the Mountains of Madness an awful lot, I'd continue to read the rest, and that is kind of why some of his Dreamland stuff really, really appeals to me, because that was quite a nice relief from the kind of isolated horror of At the Mountains of Madness. And then we come on to the first volume of Lovecraft's revisions, The Horror in the Museum. And these books, the books of revisions, are kind of what set me off thinking, do you know what, I'm going to do the Lovecraft video. Because I want to do a video about Lovecraft's revisions. I don't quite know how I'm going to do it yet. It's not going to be like very, very soon. So The Horror in the Museum is brilliant. That's such a good story. 4 O'Clock. Actually, 4 O'Clock by Sonia Green, who was Lovecraft's wife. Some people think Sonia Green just wrote that and Lovecraft kind of looked over it and went, yeah, that's all right. And The Loved Dead by C.M. Eddy. That's a harsh and ugly and unpleasant story. It's wonderful. So Panther reprinted, I think this was originally an Arkham House volume. Panther reprinted it in 2 volumes. So there's The Horror in the Museum and The Horror in the Burying Ground. Oh, oops. I think this one was also very cheap. Maybe I ought to... These have been sealed up in little collector's bags for a long time. So maybe I ought to go through them and see if I need to track down any copies that are in slightly better condition. Again, Invisible Monster, Man of Stone, Deaf, Dumb and Blind by C.M. Eddy. C.M. Eddy was really good, and I don't know if he was good or if he was okay and Lovecraft brought his stuff up to a point where it was really good. Or I need to find some more of his stuff. I think that's going to be a hunt for 2022. Some more C.M. Eddy fiction. And then last but not least, one not by Lovecraft again. So as things were published in the US by Ballantine, Panther published them in this country. So that's their version of Lovecraft, A Look Behind the Cthulhu Mythos by Lynn Carter. So that's some of my favourite bits and bobs out of my Lovecraft collection. Books that I genuinely love to read and I've owned for decades. And they give me happy memories of a kind of teenage time, and happy memories of discovering weird fiction that wasn't, I'm not criticising them, but that wasn't Stephen King or Dean Koontz. Growing up then, they were the big names, and if you like horror, oh, you read, that's like all you got from a lot of shops. And Lovecraft was something different. Lovecraft was exciting and vigorous and unusual and pretentious and wonderful. So thank you for watching, guys, and I will see you lovely folks in the next video.